EduVerse PD podcast, brought to you by ProEd Education Solutions, your on-the-go professional development. Welcome to the EduVerse PD podcast. In today's episode, Andy and Liz explore a subtle yet powerful shift in teaching practice, giving feedback that moves from evaluation to growth. Drawing on Dr. Karen Barto's article, Less Judgment, More Learning, using non-evaluative feedback in writing, featured in EduVerse Newsletter, Issue 26, this conversation rethinks how feedback can truly support student learning. What happens when we replace correction with curiosity and judgment with reflection? Let's join Andy and Liz as they unpack how non-evaluative feedback can transform the writing classroom into a space for confidence, reflection, and continuous improvement.
Imagine pouring your heart into a deeply personal essay. You sweat over every single word, you finally hand it over to your mentor, and you wait. What if the absolute best, most transformative thing they could do for you in that moment is hand it back without giving you a single word of praise? Welcome back to the EduVerse PD podcast. I'm your host, Andy, and alongside me is our expert guide, Liz.
Hi, everyone. It is so great to be here.
Today, we have a deep dive custom-tailored specifically for you, the listener. We're looking at a radical shift in how we teach, how we lead, and honestly, how we give feedback in general.
Yeah, and I mean, it sounds completely counterintuitive right out of the gate, doesn't it? As educators, or really anyone in any kind of mentorship role, our absolute first instinct is to evaluate.
Right, to grade it.
Exactly. We want to correct the mistakes, sure, but we also really want to shower praise on the successes. We want to be encouraging. But the source material we're unpacking today, it challenges that fundamental instinct.
And the person challenging that instinct is Dr. Karen Barto. We are diving into her fascinating article titled Less Judgment, More Learning, using non-evaluative feedback in writing.
It's such a good read.
It really is. And just to give you a sense of who we're learning from today, Dr. Barto brings over 25 years of experience to this. She's the founder of Polymath Education over in the Netherlands.
Wow.
Yeah. And she served as a U.S. Department of State English language specialist. So, she has seen how writing is taught and how feedback is processed across countless different cultures and contexts.
And through all of those decades of experience, she has zeroed in on a core trap in our classrooms. Now, we all know handing back a paper bleeding in red ink crushes a student's confidence.
Oh, absolutely. The classic red pen trauma.
Right. The criticism creates shame, fear of failure takes over, and then the student they stop taking risks. That's old news to anyone who follows education.
Yeah.
But Dr. Barto argues that the trap isn't just the red pen. The trap is actually the gold star, too. She argues that praise is secretly undermining deep learning just as much as criticism.
Okay, wait. Let me push back on this right away because this is where the article really tripped me up.
Go for it.
I get why criticism is bad. I mean, we've all been there. But why is a good job a toxic thing? How can positive reinforcement, which is basically the bedrock of making people feel good about their work, be detrimental?
It's a really tough pill to swallow, honestly. So much of our educational training is built on these traditional behaviorist approaches.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, when we talk about behaviorism, we're essentially talking about treating students like subjects in a lab experiment. Do the trick, get the treat, pull the lever, get the pellet.
Oh, right.
We're taught to use positive reinforcement to condition behavior, but the research cited in the article shows severe limitations to this when it comes to complex cognitive tasks like writing.
Because writing isn't a simple trick you can just train someone to do, like rolling over.
Precisely. When you give constant evaluative praise, you're actually creating a massive amount of pressure for that student. It becomes a totally different kind of fear.
Like a performance anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. It's no longer the fear of failing, it's the fear of losing the praise they just received. They start thinking, if I try something new and it doesn't work, I won't get the gold star next time.
Oh, wow. That makes me think of playing a massive, beautiful open-world video game.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Like, if the only reason you're playing is to grind for the high score, which in this case is the teachers praise you, you completely stop exploring the map.
Right, because wandering into the unknown doesn't get you points.
Exactly. You stop wandering into the unknown forests of your own ideas. You just repeat the safest, most repetitive tasks you know will make the score go up. The grade completely replaces the actual learning.
That is a brilliant way to visualize the psychology at play here. Constant evaluation, even when it is glowing and positive, reinforces the student's need for external approval.
It makes them reliant on you.
It does. It sends a dual message that's quite damaging. First, it subtly tells the student that their own judgment of their work just isn't good enough. They need a perceived authority figure to validate it.
Right.
And second, it tells them they must constantly contort their ideas to meet an external set of expectations. And here's where it gets even more critical.
Okay.
The research shows that this pressure does not fall equally on all students.
Yeah, the article mentioned it disproportionately affects underrepresented students. But break that down for me. Why does praise hit differently depending on a student's background?
Well, think about the cognitive load of just being in a room where you feel you don't naturally belong.
Yeah.
This could be due to language background, socioeconomic status, or neurotype.
Okay.
Let's take neurodivergent students, for example. Many of them spend their entire day masking, meaning they're actively suppressing their natural behaviors to mimic neurotypical standards just to survive the school day.
Oh, wow. So if you constantly praise them, they might not feel like you're praising their actual ideas. They might feel like you're just praising how well they masked.
Exactly. Or consider a student from a marginalized cultural background. Constant evaluation feels like a perpetual test of their right to be in the room.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. Are they being graded on their intellect or on how well they can code switch into the dominant culture's voice? It distracts them from engaging with their actual ideas. The evaluation itself becomes this exhausting hurdle.
Okay, I am fully on board now. That makes total sense. But practically speaking, if we strip away the criticism because it causes shame, and we strip away the praise because it turns them into like reward-chasing robots, what is left? You can't just have a student hand in an essay and toss into a black hole. Which brings us to the actual antidote Dr. Barto proposes, right? Non-evaluative feedback.
Right. And non-evaluative feedback is exactly what it sounds like. It's feedback that contains absolutely zero judgment. It does not assign value.
So no gold stars.
None. There are no good, bad, correct, or genius labels. Instead, it operates entirely as formative feedback.
Formative meaning it's about forming the work, not judging the final product.
Yes. The goal is simply to help writers notice their own writing, to help them reflect on the message they are trying to send, and understand how a reader might interpret those words in real time.
Which is so important.
The article points out that this is crucial for what's called early drafting.
Which makes total sense. I mean, evaluating an early draft is incredibly illogical. It's like an artist sketching the wireframe of a painting. You have these rough pencil lines just mapping out the proportions on the canvas.
Right, and you would never walk up to an artist sketching a stick figure and start critiquing their shading technique or their color theory.
Exactly. The drawing isn't finished yet. You have to let them flesh out the basic shapes before you bring out the magnifying glass. If you critique the shading too early, they'll just throw the canvas away.
And what's fascinating here is how directly this approach supports innovation. When a final grade is on the line, writers naturally hesitate to take risks. They stick to the 5-paragraph essay structure they know. But by removing the evaluation from the early stages, you create a safe sandbox. You foster an environment where trying a bizarre new format or an unfamiliar genre isn't penalized. They don't need to hear what is right or wrong in that moment.
So we've established the psychology. But let's talk execution, because I'm putting myself in the shoes of an overworked educator listening to this.
Oh, for sure.
You're used to grading rubrics. How do you implement zero judgment feedback in a real classroom? Dr. Barto lays out some highly practical strategies, and the first one is just called listening without responding.
It is arguably the simplest strategy, but perhaps the most profound. A student reads their work aloud, or someone reads it for them to a partner or the teacher.
Okay.
And the listener does nothing but acknowledge that they heard it. No critique, no praise, no advice. Just, thank you, I listened.
I have to admit, if I'm the teacher, that sounds incredibly awkward. If a student reads a super clunky paragraph, my brain immediately wants to jump in and fix it.
Of course it does.
And if I just sit there in silence, aren't they going to assume I hated it?
That is the initial fear, absolutely. The restraint required is immense. But that forced silence is the magic of the technique.
Really?
Yeah, because when you force that silence, you shift the cognitive load entirely back to the writer. Usually, the second a student stops reading, they look to the authority figure to tell them what to think about what they just read.
They outsource their own judgment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
By staying silent, you become a mirror, not a judge. The writer experiences the vulnerability of sharing their rough work. They realize that the sky didn't fall, and they survived without being judged, and then the silence gives them space to reflect on their own words organically.
Wow.
It builds massive confidence.
It proves vulnerability is manageable. Okay,
Yeah.
I see the power in that. But we can't stay silent forever. Eventually, they need a reaction.
Right, eventually you have to talk.
Which leads to the second strategy, summary and clarification. This is where the reader briefly summarizes what they just heard. You aren't judging the quality, you're just reflecting the message back. You say, here is what I understood your passage to mean.
And this is incredibly reassuring because usually the reader captures at least some of the intended message.
Right.
But if the reader completely misunderstands, that is pure, non-judgmental gold. The writer learns exactly where the communication broke down without feeling attacked.
Dr. Barto shares a great anecdote about this.
Yeah.
She worked with a writer whose English grammar was technically flawless, but the guy loved to use incredibly long, complex sentences.
We all know writers like that.
Oh, definitely. By the end of the paragraph, you've completely forgotten what the subject of the sentence was. So using this summary and clarification technique, the readers didn't say, your sentences are too long, this is bad writing.
Right.
They just said, here is what I understood. And he could clearly see that they were getting lost in his labyrinth.
What was his reaction?
He fixed it himself. It prompted him, completely on his own, to split his long sentences into shorter ones. He kept his meaning, but clarified the delivery. No red pen required.
That is student agency in action. Now, moving past summary, we look at how to give highly specific reactions that still avoid evaluation.
Okay, lay it on me.
The next strategy is called pointing. This is where the reader focuses purely on descriptive observations. You might read a draft and say, I see the word biome several times in this paragraph.
Notice you aren't saying, you use biome too much, go get a thesaurus. It's purely observational.
Exactly. The feedback is just a statement of fact. And then the ball is back in the writer's court.
I like that.
The writer might think, yes, I repeated biome purposefully because it's the exact scientific term I need. Or they might realize, oh, wow, I didn't even notice I used it 4 times. That sounds clunky. Let me change that. The conversation stays open and curious.
Sparking curiosity instead of defensiveness. I love that. And a slight variation of that is the center of gravity technique, right?
Yes, exactly.
The reader identifies what they think the main idea is. If it mismatches the writer's intent, it sparks a great discussion. Like, why did you think my main idea was X when I was actually trying to write about Y?
And the beauty of that conversation is that no one is right or wrong. They are exploring how reading conventions shape interpretation.
Right.
Maybe the reader assumed the last sentence was the thesis, but the writer buried the main idea in the second paragraph. It makes the mechanics of writing visible without turning them into a metric for punishment.
Now, my absolute favorite technique from the article comes from the University of Arizona's Writing Skills Improvement Program. They call it Velcro words.
It is such a brilliant visual metaphor.
It really is. Think about Velcro.
Yeah.
It's super sticky.
Yeah.
In writing, a Velcro word is a word or a phrase that it just sticks with the reader. It catches your attention.
Mm-hmm.
To build on the metaphor, I like to think a Velcro word catches you either because it's the hook or because it's the fuzz.
The hook or the fuzz? Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, sometimes a word is the hook because it introduces a brilliant, highly fascinating idea, but the writer just glossed over it.
Give me an example.
Let's say a student is writing a history paper and casually drops the phrase, the inevitable collapse of the microeconomy, and then just moves on. That's a hook. As a reader, I'm caught on that. I want to know more.
I see. And what about the fuzz?
The fuzz is when a word trips you up because it represents a tangled logical gap or an unexplained factual error. It's messy. So in a classroom, having students share their Velcro words just saying, hey, this phrase stuck to me, naturally leads the writer to rethink, clarify, or expand those areas.
It's just human curiosity driving the revision process.
Exactly. But let me play devil's advocate again here for a second.
Go for it.
Silence, pointing, Velcro words. These are great for building confidence. But what about a student whose logic is just fundamentally flawed? How do we stress test a bad argument if we aren't allowed to tell them it's a bad argument?
That brings us to a really fun role-play exercise Dr. Barto highlights called Believing and Doubting.
Oh, this is a good one.
It allows readers to give incredibly rigorous, tough feedback without ever personally assessing the writing. First, the reader plays the role of someone who completely and utterly believes everything the writer has written.
Okay.
They enthusiastically suggest additional evidence to make the argument even stronger.
And then they flip the script. Then they play the role of someone who completely disagrees. They propose extreme, ruthless counter-arguments. It's like an engineering stress test for a bridge. You want to know how strong a bridge is. You don't just stand back and say, good job, bridge. You push it to its absolute maximum load limits.
Right. You apply extreme weight and extreme wind resistance to see exactly where the structural weak points are before it's open to the public.
But how does a student not take that personally? If someone is tearing down my argument, even in a role play, that feels like criticism.
The secret is in the artificiality of the role play. Because the roles of complete believer and complete doubter are intentionally theatrical and extreme, it completely neutralizes the ego.
Because it's a game.
Yes, everyone knows it's a game. It turns critique into a communal, often humorous intellectual exercise rather than a personal attack. You are attacking the ideas on behalf of a fictional persona, not attacking the writer.
That makes a lot of sense. The theatricality creates a buffer. Now, we have to talk about how modern technology fits into all this, specifically AI.
This is a huge topic right now.
Because if you think about it, an AI tool is basically the ultimate non-evaluative mirror. It has no ego, it doesn't judge, it just processes.
It is an incredibly powerful tool for this, but the article includes a very crucial caveat. Experienced writers can absolutely use AI tools to simulate these exact strategies.
So what does that actually look like in practice? How do I prompt an AI to do this?
Instead of asking the AI, is my essay good, which invites evaluation, you use specific prompts based on these techniques. You might paste your text and prompt the AI, act as a complete doubter, read this draft and provide the 3 most extreme counterarguments to my main point.
Oh, that's smart.
Or you might prompt it, summarize the core message of this text in 2 sentences.
And if the AI spits back a summary that has nothing to do with what you meant to write, you instantly know your draft isn't clear yet.
Exactly. But here's the caveat. This must be used very cautiously and with careful scaffolding for less experienced writers.
Why? If it's just a mirror, why is it dangerous for novices?
Because evaluating AI-generated responses requires a highly developed internal compass. An AI will frequently hallucinate logical connections that aren't actually in the text, or it might summarize something confidently but incorrectly.
Right, they make stuff up all the time.
They do. And a novice writer who is already lacking confidence might take the AI summary as absolute truth. They might think, well, the computer said my essay is about X, so I guess I have to change my whole paper to match.
Ah, I see. They surrender their agency to the algorithm.
Yes. The student needs to have already developed their own critical judgment before they can effectively spar with an AI. The tools are only as good as the foundational skills of the person wielding them.
Which really zooms us back out to the ultimate goal of all of this. We're trying to develop thinkers, not just assignment completers.
Precisely. And I think it's really important to clarify that adopting non-evaluative feedback does not mean we are abandoning assessment entirely.
Right.
We aren't lowering our expectations. We aren't saying that grades disappear forever and grammar no longer matters in the real world.
Right. Eventually, the final draft has to be graded. The bridge has to be built and open to traffic.
Yes. It simply means we are carving out vital, pressure-free moments earlier in the drafting process. It proves to students that the foundation of writing is their own ideas.
Yeah.
And they have the capacity to work out how to best convey those ideas without waiting for an authority figure to validate them. They begin to see themselves as authors with ideas worth sharing, rather than just performers trying to satisfy a rubric.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've talked a lot about the classroom. But communication and the fear of judgment are universal. And that leaves us with a final thought to mull over today. If stripping away external judgment, both the positive and the negative, is the secret to finding our authentic, confident voice in writing, where else in our lives is the constant, exhausting pursuit of a good grade or, a 5-star review stopping us from figuring out who we actually want to be?
That is a brilliant open question to leave everyone with.
Until next time, keep exploring and keep noticing what sticks.
A refreshing perspective on feedback and learning. Thank you, Andy and Liz, for highlighting how small techniques can lead to meaningful changes in student growth. If you'd like to explore these ideas further, read the full article, Less Judgment, More Learning, Using Non-Evaluative Feedback in Writing, by Dr. Karen Barto in EduVerse Newsletter, Issue 26. Visit our website to download the full issue at www.proed.com.vn/eduverse. And as always, EduVerse is a space for sharing ideas that make a difference. If you have insights, practices, or experiences to contribute, we invite you to join our growing community of educators worldwide. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to welcoming you back in the next episode of the EduVerse PD podcast, brought to you by ProEd Education Solutions.